All right, and I'll share my screen, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to the last Symbiota support group of 2024, and then we'll be kicking it off in 2025. Exciting. I'm going to start out with some announcements, and then we'll go into the meat of today's presentation, which is hopefully going to be relatively short. So there's going to be plenty of time for questions and relating to the topic, but also relating to whatever else you might be running into. Particularly, the Symbiota 3.1 has been released to a lot of portals. So if you have any questions or feedback about that, we'd be happy to hear that. So some announcements first off is about 3.1. So we recently upgraded Ecdysis, the Neotropical Flora, Teredo Portal, Algae Herbarium Consortium, and Vertibase. And I think kind of the only ones remaining are the Consortium of Northeastern Herbaria, which is really on the cusp. It's about to be rolled out any moment, probably tonight, if not tomorrow night. And then SciNet, of course. So remember that the SciNet network consists of lots of portals. That means the Consortium of Midwest Herbaria, the Great Plains Consortium, the North American Network of Small Herbaria, otherwise known as NANCH, Torch, Cernic, and many others that I have not mentioned. Those are all sharing one database. And because of that, we need to update the database all at one time, which means we need to update all of the portals at the same time, basically. So we have gone through and restyled the portals just a little bit because all of the portals are going to need some adjustments for more responsive design. So they're going to be looking nicer on your phone. And then also for accessibility. So they are going to be more accessible for screen readers so that folks with visual disabilities can read them better. So Lindsay put some useful links in the chat about 3.1 upgrades. Feel free to take a look at those if you haven't seen our emails about that yet, but those are coming soon. Which also includes cool things like the ability to batch upload associations, which I know the Torch people have been super excited about. And looking forward to getting that rolled out, hopefully this weekend. That's the plan for SciNet is this weekend we'll be doing that big download or big upgrade. That also means that SciNet is going to be down for a time, the SciNet network, all of those portals. So over the weekend, you're likely going to have some outages in the SciNet network. So let us know if that poses any particular problems for you. We can try to suggest some alternatives or get you the data ahead of time. But just so you know that we're going to have some outages coming up soon. Another change that's coming up is, as you may recall, the Symbiota support group is now based out of University of Kansas. And as such, we're going to be changing the Symbiota support group link. So if you have, your regular Zoom reminder to get you onto this call, you're just going to need to update that with a new link that's going to be a University of Kansas Zoom link. And it's going to be posted on our Symbiota support group page. So just keep your eyes open for that. And we'll be emailing all the current registrants of this Zoom registration so that you make sure you have that, but just don't try to come to an ASU link next time there's Symbiota support group. Okay, I have a bunch of announcements about conferences thinking forward to 2025. The dates for the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, or SPINACH, meeting have been finalized for the last week of May. There was previously an announcement that it was going to be in June, but due to some scheduling conflicts, it's now going to be at the end of May. It's going to be super great at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, which is quite beautiful, lots and lots of trees. And I think it's going to be a great time. So make sure you mark your calendar for that. There's going to be plenty of Symbiota activities, probably a symposium, a bunch of talks, and most of the team is likely going to be there in person. So if you need any Symbiota things, that's your time to go and see us in person. Also, just kind of a announcement for the botanical community is we recently received an email that the location of Botany 2025 is going to change. They haven't announced it yet, and it's going to be the same dates, and the website hasn't been updated yet. So this is just what we have received. It's supposedly going to be somewhere else in the Southwest, but the same dates. So make sure you check your emails and the website to keep abreast of that. And then finally for this section, another date to save is the date for BioDigicon. This is going to be a combined BioDigicon digital data conference put on by iDigBio. It's going to be in September in Washington, D.C. It's going to be super fun, super wide-reaching, we're hoping to get a lot of different people who are kind of at the periphery of natural history collections. So make sure you mark your calendars and consider going to that. Okay, so any questions about those announcements before we hop into our content? Nope. Okay, let's move along then. So today we're going to talk about alternative identifiers, also known as other catalog numbers. At least that's how they've been referred to in the past. And I'm going to walk us through changes that have happened in the recent history of using other catalog numbers slash alternative identifiers or additional identifiers. So I'm going to talk about the old method, which is just using the other catalog numbers field. Then I'm going to talk about the new method, which is a completely different table called additional identifiers or alternative identifiers, whatever you want to call it. And then I'm going to talk about searching for alternative identifiers and how you may be affected by these kind of structural changes that are on the back end of Symbiota. And I didn't put this in the agenda, but also throughout, I'm going to be talking about some upcoming changes to alternative identifiers to fix some of the problems that we've identified by this transition. So hopefully, if you have also noticed some little quirks from the new system, hopefully we'll be addressing those soon. All right, let's talk about how other catalog numbers used to be. So other catalog numbers is a Darwin Core term or a Darwin Core field, which just means it's a definition for where you can throw certain types of data. And I can throw this link in the chat probably right now. So, and this is just a single text field, at least according to the Darwin Core, and you can have one or many alternative identifiers. So alternative identifiers could be old accession numbers. They could be references to other data sets that that piece of data or that specimen has been a part of. I know like national parks have their own system of accession numbers that you're required to, or at least suggested to, continue to have affiliated with your specimens. So it's really important to keep track of things like this. I know some cultivated plants have what are called as PI numbers if they're with the USDA. So it's important to keep these linkages between the new identifiers or the new catalog numbers and barcode numbers and all the old things, all the old names that specimen record may have had. And by names, I don't mean taxonomic names. I mean identifiers of some sort. So before Symbiota 3.0, so we're actually going back. So we're talking about everything going 3.1 in the next couple of weeks. Well, back in 2023, I believe, we released Symbiota 3.0. And that was not super impactful on the front end. There weren't a lot of changes to the user interfaces, so you might not have even heard any kind of fanfare about that. But that's largely because it was a lot of things that were kind of adjusting in the back end. And one of those things that you actually could see on the front end was changing the way we treated other catalog numbers. So before Symbiota 3.0, you would just see this other catalog numbers field, and it acted just like catalog numbers or collectors or number or anything like that. It was just a text field. And so that works fine if you have one other catalog number, but it doesn't work super well if you want to label that catalog number and if you have multiple catalog numbers. And what if the multiple catalog numbers have different labels? So it made it kind of difficult to search for them because you're like, okay, do I include like the name of the catalog number? Like, do I say PI number, put the number? Do I do PI number colon, put the number? Is there a space? Do I search all of it? So searching was a little bit complicated and you couldn't put very many catalog numbers or other identifiers in there. This was particularly a problem for the National Ecological Observatory Network group because they have a bunch of identifiers associated with their samples, and so they often wanted multiple things. And I'm pretty sure that they at least helped with the development of the changes that you're going to see here. And I also wanted to give this little aside if you're like, how do I know what version my portal is running in? How do I know if I'm 3.0 or 3.1? Well, I can show you. If you go to your favorite portal and you go to sitemap and you scroll all the way down, you'll see what version you're running. The first number is the version of the code that your portal is running. And the second number is the version of the schema that you're running. The schema is the table structure on the back end. So it's like what tables and fields and such do you have in the database versus the number up here, the code number. That's what version of the code is talking to the database. So you might not need to reference that ever, but if you're just like, oh shoot, like this seems to be a problem. I wonder if it's because they just updated the code. You can go in and be like, oh yeah, it's 3.1.4 and 2 weeks ago it was 3.1.3. Like maybe that's a code change. So just a helpful FYI. Okay, so I talked about the old method. It was just a text file or a text field, and that's the way it would search too. The new method is a bit more complicated, which also allows us to have a lot more flexibility and ease of search. So in Symbiota 3.0 and beyond, you've probably noticed that there is actually kind of like a little table within the tables. So in your occurrence editor, you'll see this little table that has some options here, tag name and additional identifier value. And so the values in this additional identifier value, you can kind of consider the same as an other catalog number. It's just one that you can add a label to, and you can have many of them. One thing that we've seen people have trouble with is they'll enter something in tag name, but not in additional identifier value. That's because this is the essential piece of identifying information. And this is just an optional label that you can stick on it. So this is what people will actually search in the database. And right now, at least, you cannot search by tag name. So if you want something that's going to be searchable via other catalog numbers, you'll want to put that value here in additional identifier values. So what we did is this table structure is actually reflected in the schema, in the database, like in the tables. And we have a brand new table that's called OM occur identifiers. I'm just going to call it the identifier table. And it has some essential fields. All the fields are listed down here, but because most of them are not super pertinent to all of you, I'm just going to focus on these three. So there's the unique ID of the record, and this is what's going to connect your value in the other tables to the identifier table. There's the identifier name, so that's the tag name, or the label that you're sticking onto that other catalog number to say this is an accession number or this is a PI number. And then there's identifier value. So that's the catalog number or what that accession number actually is. So it's all been kind of expanded out of that one single table so that you can have multiple values and you can search based off of the actual value and not like some preceding information about what that value is. So one specimen could have theoretically hundreds of values in this table. So you would just have like the same OCCID number or the same unique ID of the record in multiple rows, and it would just have different values for identifier name and identifier value. And so when you do a search for other catalog number, it's looking through that new table saying, does this exist anywhere in this table? And so when you enter data using the occurrence editor, the values that are here in this tag name go into the identifier named field in that table. And in the additional identifier value, that's what goes into identifier value. And then the identifier name is optional. You don't have to label your additional identifiers if you don't want to. But the identifier value is not optional because that is the actual value that you're putting in that field. Okay, all clear so far? We just kind of took one field and pulled it into a bunch of other fields so that it's more clear. Al says, can I sort the additional identifiers by identifier name? Good question. No, there's currently no capacity to sort the additional identifiers, but as you may have noticed, there is a sort by field in the database, so we could develop that feature in the future where you can sort things. I don't know what kind of the consensus on how people would want to sort would be, but we've seen that a couple times where people are like, could it be alphabetical or could it be like in the order in which, I don't know, it was added. I think right now it just kind of is random, but I could be wrong. It might be based on like numeric values. I'm going to check if there's any new questions. Donna says current, excuse me, current search is exact match only, not include string. Will this change? Do you mean like exact match of the catalog number, like when you do a public search?
It might be easier for me to explain, like our accession number, for example, in the case of a mixed collection, we might have 36A and 36B. But actually, if I go into that, what is now called other catalog, or there's a place where you search for that, and I put in 36, it will come up with nothing if we don't have a 36. You have to search it, the 36A or 36B. Whereas like when you search a species name or a collector or a county, a state, anything, you can just put in like part of it and it comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that that's currently on the docket because a search that's only partial is actually a lot more computationally expensive than one that's full. Like you're only looking for this value, not this value plus or minus a bunch of stuff. But that's definitely something that we could do if there's a demand for it.
We could do something like if someone puts a percent sign, then it creates a wildcard and it'll look for that. But by default, people don't really want it to be wild by default. Wild means it just pulls out anything because let's say someone's looking for an old catalog number of 235. And if you're looking for a wildcard search for 235 and anything, then it's going to get a lot of hits. But if you have a situation where you could just put a percent sign where you want that wild card to be, that would do it. And then you also know if you're doing a wild card search, you might have to wait a little bit longer than the other search.
Yeah, that's a great point. You wouldn't want to search for a really small number. You might be like, ah, shoot, I should have done a wildcard search or something.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great idea. Walter says being able to sort by identifier value would be super helpful for sorting barcode numbers for image specimens. Walter, do you mean sort by identifier value like when you're looking at the table view and you're saying search by kind of the other catalog numbers that exist there?
Yeah, yeah. Or other applications where, I'm trying to organize things by the barcode number rather than the accession number, which you can't do right now, but that would be really helpful.
Because you put your barcode numbers in the additional identifiers instead
We
of
do,
catalog
yeah,
numbers?
because
Okay.
I don't know where else to put it.
Hmm.
We've been
Yeah.
consistent in doing that.
I don't actually know how sorting works based on other catalog numbers, if it does at all. Ed, do you know how, if there's any sorting capabilities in other catalog numbers right now?
There's not, because since it's another table, you might have
Right.
multiple catalog numbers per. So if we added that, it'd be a type of situation where you pick the tag name
Mm-hmm.
and a sort. So
Mm-hmm.
that would take a little development.
Yeah. First, we need to be able to search by just tag name, and we know that people are hoping for that. But then sorting by is another good thought. Other questions or comments before we move on? Okay. I'm going to, let's see, use sort value as in images. Yeah, Al, it is possible, like I showed you in a previous slide, like sort by is a value in the table. So we could make use of that to allow some sorting. But currently there's just no user interfaces to put data into that field. Okay, so here's where things get a little bit complicated because we had this old system and we have this new system, but the new system has not completely usurped the old system. Code is constantly changing, and things that we have been able to, some things we have been able to fully fix and adjust to the new system, and some things are not completely adjusted to the new system. One particular thing that we have that we know is I wouldn't call it a problem, but kind of a discrepancy that trips people up is that when you upload data into the other catalog numbers field, it actually doesn't go into the new system. So if you're uploading a skeletal file upload, a full text upload, or a Darwin core upload, those other catalog numbers, just one for one, go into the text field because the text field does actually still exist. But any new data that you add from the occurrence editor, that goes into the new system, the new table. But uploads currently do not do that. So that means that then you kind of end up having data in two different places, and they're still both accessible and still both searchable. But if you ever seen any discrepancies by the way that something can be searched, then that's probably the source of the problem. So say I uploaded this value into other catalog numbers just via a CSV. My field looks like this. Like this is my column and this is my row. The additional confusing thing is that when you open the occurrence editor, it will look like this. It will look fully parsed out as if it were entered nicely into the identifier table. That's because whenever a record is loaded on the fly in the occurrence editor, it does that parsing on the fly so that you can see it correctly. And if you saved the record right here, like you made a tiny little change, then it actually would take all that data and it would put it into the correct table. So that's because when you enter data directly into the occurrence editor, it puts it into the correct table. And so this is the same thing at work, is that it's parsing it on the fly, and then you're making changes and it's saving it into the new table. So you might be like, okay, it doesn't seem like my data's in the old field. It should be in the new field because it's showing up on my occurrence editor that way. It's actually just doing that parsing right when you're looking at it. And if you saved it, it's parsing it, saving it parsed later on. But in reality, it could be that those data are just still coming from, oh, these should be going the other direction, coming from other catalog numbers, just being parsed by the occurrence editor viewer. So as a result, or kind of like in addition, I wanted to put some clarification out there about how you can search for and display, or why you might see discrepancies in what other catalog number values are displayed. Because you might have a situation where you have uploaded data and then or you have old data that had values in other catalog numbers and not in not in the identifiers table. So I just did some hunting around and testing to make sure that these are correct, and hopefully they are. What I found is that if there are values in the new identifiers table, those values are what's shown instead of the values in other catalog numbers in these three places: in Darwin Core archives or downloads of data, in the list display of a public search, and in the public display. So what I mean by that is, say I have this record here, and it's showing me that my secondary catalog number is this number here. But if I go into the occurrence editor, I see that it actually has 2. And we're like, what's that discrepancy? And that's actually because this one is in the old table, and this one was entered via the new table. So this seems very confusing, but this actually should not happen very much to you, because if you upload data, it's going to all be in the old table. And if you add data directly into the occurrence editor, it should all be entered into the new system. So you should only have records that are completely in the old system or completely in the new system. So you probably won't need to be worrying about this too much. But just note that if that comes up, you might be like, something's amiss with where my other catalog numbers are stored. And so if you do see issues like that, you're like, I'm really having trouble having people find these data, then you can reach out to us and be like, hey, I think there's some like mismatch between where my other catalog numbers are stored. Can you go take a look? And we can either like move stuff into the new system, or just kind of double check. It's just kind of nice to know that there might be 2 places where those data are stored. Your data aren't like miraculously disappearing or something. And then I wanted to touch base about searching for these alternative identifiers. This is where those differences may come up. So if you want to search for other catalog numbers, I've put 2 different versions of the search form here. This is kind of the 3.0 search, and this is the 3.1 search. You will put your other catalog number value into the catalog number field, and then just make sure that this box here that says include other catalog numbers and GUIDs is checked. Then it's going to go and search in that new table for your values. It will also, at least currently, search for in the old field, in the old other catalog number field for your data, which is nice because you might have uploaded that via a text file and you still want that to be searchable. The problem may arise then if you put a labeled other catalog number, if you uploaded a labeled catalog number, like one that has a colon in between, and you expect it to be parsed out into that tag name and other catalog number. If you have done that in an upload, that parsing has not happened and that data has not been put into the identifiers table. So if someone is trying to find this record, then they need to search for verbatim grin : PI space 23663. So this one has been uploaded. This was uploaded after. So let's see if I go grin : PI 233623663, then I should find that specimen record. Unless I already changed it.
I think you might be a 6, Katie.
Three,
Oh,
three.
thank you.
You missed a 6, yeah.
Appreciate it. There we go. Now I do find that record, and also apparently some other records that have the same grin number. But if I went back here and I just searched for PI blah blah blah, I would not find it. And if I just searched for this, I would also not find that very specific record. So if people are having trouble finding records and it's kind of a labeled one, then you will know that, oh, that either needs to be, they either need to search with that colon, or what you can do is open up that record. Whoops. Open up that record. In the occurrence editor. And make a small adjustment here, or just like subtract something and then add it back. Then hit enter or save your record. And then that's going to auto parse that into the new table. So if you have something that you particularly want to be parsed immediately and findable, you can go and make that change in there. Obviously, that is not a convenient solution or a sustainable solution. So you'll be happy to know that we're currently working on having the uploader automatically parse and put those new values into the new system. So that's underway. We're almost done with it, actually. We're just kind of doing some bug fixing, and that should come out, I think, in Symbiota 3.3. I think it was one beyond next time. So 3.2 should be coming out in another few months, I believe, and then 3.3 would be after that. So just to summarize in text so that we have it here, the search tools look in the identifiers table first, then the other catalog numbers field. But if you ever batch uploaded other catalog numbers that have tag names, you have to search for them with those tag names. And you can add those tag names by editing them through the occurrence editor. But of course, you don't want to do that with 1,000 records. So just stay tuned and we'll be able to help you with that in the future. And if you do have like a big upload that had tons of those that you're like, oh man, they're super not searchable and this is like a bummer, just email us and we can do a batch kind of move and parse for any particular sets of records. Okay, so hopefully that was clear-ish. I know it's kind of a complicated back-end thing, but we want to just make sure that everyone is on the same page about that new system and answer any questions you might have about it.
All right, I have a couple of things I would just like to add. One is
Perfect.
one of the problems is each Symbiota portal has a mixture of data sets that people have within the portal. Some are live managed directly in the portal. And if you start live managing your data and entering that stuff through the editor, it's actually going to go into that separate table. And if it goes in that separate table, it's fully indexed. That's the tag name and the values. An index means is basically the database creates a phone book of all those values. So it makes it really easy to look up those values super fast. Where if they're all concatenated in one field, which is what was happening in the past, you can't do these wildcard searches and you can't do them quickly, at least. It's a lot more complicated. So that's why we have those two systems. But people that upload snapshots, parsing this stuff out and having it go in the correct columns is an imprecise science because a lot of times they don't concatenate things using the same delimiters. They don't have the same format. There's errors and so forth. So what we're working to do is to create systems where the data can be translated into this fully searchable indexed format. And that's where we still have some tasks to do. And until we get that done, it just means that not everything is going to be fully searchable. Some other developments that's happened actually just recently that will come out in 3.2, this next release within next month, is that the identifiers are put in a separate extension file within the Darwin Core archive. And that is when you push your data to GBIF. Those identifiers will go to GBIF, and hopefully that makes them searchable within their system too. We're not sure if that's totally supported within GBIF yet, but hopefully it will be if it's not. And but if you do push your data between different Symbiota portals, the goal is that have everything parsed out and go into correct columns directly from that Darwin Core extension file rather than parsing this stuff out on the fly. So our end goal is to have everything structured and in a standardized manner so that we're not parsing this stuff out, but we're having a little bit growing pains to make it searchable for the next month or two, but we'll get there.
Thanks, Ed. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to use your Zoom. Oh yeah, James is demonstrating the use of the Zoom hand. Go for it, James.
Lots of questions, but I don't have to ask them all at once. So you showed an example where you're editing a separate field in the occurrence editor, and that will update and add stuff to OM occur identifiers if any field is edited. Is that right?
Right, because the action that's triggering what's moving the data from the other catalog numbers to the other table is the save edits. However, I believe that you can also trigger that action by like adding a new identifier, because you might have noticed that that table kind of has a behavior of its own sometimes. Like you can delete stuff from there, and that will also trigger the update, the move to OM occur identifiers to the identifiers table, or add something there. So it might actually be that you can edit it too. I haven't checked that closely, just like editing the additional identifiers.
So the corollary to this is, will batch edits also update the OM occur identifiers table?
Not
I
yet
don't.
at this time. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, ideally what we need is another tool where people can say, okay, here's all your identifiers that are not indexed. You know, they're in the old field. Do you want to parse them out? And if you want to parse them out, what's your delimiter? You know, how do you delimit multiple identifiers? How do you delimit the tag name from the value? And then you could pick what your delimiters are, and then it'll parse it out, and then your data is all great. So.
Okay.
And then if you upload a new data set, you do have stuff within other catalog numbers. Ideally, it's going to figure out how to parse that out. But we're also, another thing we're adding is a tool where people can upload identifiers specifically associated with records. And they say, so they'll upload a CSV that has 3 files, 3 columns. One is catalog number of the record they want to match on. And then another column is the other identifier. And then the optional tag name. And if they have multiple identifiers for same record, you would have multiple rows, all with the same catalog number, but different identifiers. And that's where you could append identifiers to an existing record in batch. So unfortunately, when we're trying to index and make a field more actionable in this manner, there's a lot of different tools you have to integrate into there to convert old data to new data, but also allow a situation where you're getting data in as snapshots, and they're always going to come in the old format, the old data. And then the data you're managing, it's being converted over to the new format, but it just takes time. So it's a little challenging.
Yeah, it might seem like simple. I know you don't think this, James, but it might seem simple for us to add a field or just like, oh, just split that into two fields. But it's always like, well, how are you going to export, import, search, edit, batch edit, use the reports, view? Just there's so many different places where something is accessed. So just a bit of work.
And something like this, it was so much more work than I figured
Then we
actually. After I
realized.
started, I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that one. I forgot about this case. Because other catalog numbers is used in labels. They're used in so many different places. So
Other questions or comments? You can also ask about anything or comment about anything unrelated to additional identifiers. Yeah, Rick?
So if and when we get some of these tools like that Ed was just talking about, or ways to take old data and make it into new data, or upload data and get it into the new one, do you all have any plans for like, I guess, publishing or providing any sort of like workflow documentation on how to achieve those specific tasks that the tools would be built for?
Yeah, anything that we develop would have full documentation. Just like you probably saw in the 3.1 rollout where we linked to all the documentation there. So if there's new tools, they'll definitely have step-by-step instructions.
Okay.
And if you
Great.
see any holes, like, hey, I'd really like to figure out how to use this tool in this way, like we're happy to work on that. So just let us know if you see anything missing.
Okay. Somewhat similar, but maybe not as much. The when the new tool for importing associations, will this similar? Would any new tools kind of build off of that same um, like way of doing it? So, for instance, someone like me uploads a whole bunch of specimen records from a CSV, and now to use that, I have to essentially do that twice. Like I have to go back and upload a different CSV to incorporate those additional associations.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it possible? And I understand we're like uploading from CSV is essentially one table to a bunch of tables, and it's kind of tricky, but could it be incorporated into that just one and done kind of situation? Or is that just not going to work?
Yeah, that's what we currently have planned is that we're going to have two ways of putting your other catalog numbers in. And one is just via the flat file. Like if you format it consistently, then it will pull out like, oh, there's a colon, that must be a tag name,
Okay.
and it's separated by a semicolon, so that must be a separate one. So that's being worked into the full text and skeletal file uploaders. And then there will be hopefully an additional tool that you can, if you had, a bajillion things that you want to add to what you already have, then you could use the extended data uploader.
Okay. Cool.
That's the current plan, at least. Yeah, we kind of went back and forth about which made the most sense, but we were like, well, we have all these like NPS numbers that people usually want to add just on their spreadsheets. So we figured it'd be good to add it in just like the basic files too.
Okay. And I have one more question.
wait,
Okay,
wait,
so
Go ahead.
I just want to make one comment. So if you're uploading new data, you have stuff in other catalog numbers and you have a tag and a number, and you can have multiple stuff separated by semicolons. It'll parse it out. That's what we're planning on doing.
Okay.
But that won't be the place to append other catalog numbers to records that already exist.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that, I mean, some people that when you want to append data, they do it through the skeletal upload. But the thing is, if there's already an identifier, other identifiers associated with that record, it's not gonna add it. It's going to skip over it. So it's going to be this other upload. It's going to be the extended data upload. Same way where you do associations. That's the proper place to append data to an existing record. So.
Okay, great.
Allison.
Terry put this in the chat too, but we type certain names in the tag field over and over again, and we were wondering, is it easy to do a drop down something that remembers what you've typed a lot and just suggests it?
You can turn that on in your browser, but then it's going to do that for all of your fields. So you can turn on autocomplete options.
Oh, it seems to be already in the user interface for certain fields, like locality. It seems to always want to suggest something.
So those ones are autocompletes that are suggested by the portal, but browsers also have additional tools that can autocomplete based on your previous history. And so, yes, it is possible, but probably a lot of work to make a dropdown that is based off of some index that we have in the database. But you could try just turning on autocomplete in your browser and seeing if that accomplishes the desired effect.
Oh my God, I can see that turning into a nightmare for the rest of my workday, but
Could turn into a nightmare, yes.
okay, so it's not easy for you guys to, like, for instance, the state, if I fill in the state, then it has a drop-down list of counties, or it seems to know what I'm typing.
That's
So,
because there's a list, a lookup
okay.
list on the back end for probably about 6 fields, but not for a lot of other ones. I think, Ed, sorry, I interrupted you.
And I was just going to say, Allison, the problem is that every collection is going to want their own values. Where as far as states and counties, you know, all the counties for Arizona is the same for all collections. But if we have it, you know, SINET has over 400 collections in it, and we would have to develop a system where each collection develops their own lookups. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, and if you did like the top 10 most popular ones, like NPS numbers, then the people who had similar ones but not identical would get annoyed, because then they'd always get National Park Service when they wanted something else. So I'm starting to get it.
I mean, we're continuing to like think of ways of how we could do this and stuff like that. So that is on our mind. But one of the first things we have to do is add it where people can search based on those tags. And then, yeah, we have ideas of how to do what you want, but it's just finding the time to implement it. So.
Thanks.
James?
Yeah, so I had a similar question to Rick Levy's, but I wanted to extend it a little bit further. So I have seen other collections who are putting all kinds of data into the other catalog numbers field, genetic resources, you know, what I would consider external resources. So I'm wondering if you all have thought about how to draw the distinction between what goes in here and what goes in the linked resources tab.
Yeah, that's a great question. Just off the top of my head, I would say any identifier that refers to the exact object or occurrence that, well, this is where you get into some like semantics of like occurrence versus object. So most of the time people are treating one record in a Symbiota portal as an object. Theoretically, we are treating it as an occurrence, which is the instance of a taxon at a place at a time. So you could have a DNA sequence actually sharing the exact same occurrence because it's coming from the same taxon at the same time at the same place. But practically, people are generally using a record, like I said, as an object. So it is like philosophically okay to put both versions, both both identifiers that are talking about this one object and identifiers that are talking about things that derive from this instance of this taxon at this place at this time. I think I would just go down with the practical of like, where are you going to need to search for it? Would you search for it as an association, or would you search for it as something that you're using to find that one record? Then maybe just call that an alternative identifier. Like it's another number that I put with this object or I use to search that object, alternative identifier. If it's some way of linking two distinct resources, like I have my genetic database and I have my specimen database, I'd make that an association. So it kind of depends on like how you're going to search it and how are you going to, package it? How are other people going to search it? You can make that distinction. But it is like gets into the brain hurting part of the evening.
And I do know some collections that are using that feature, the other catalog numbers, to add like agents, people that have been associated with collecting. And the reason why they're doing that way right now is because it gets the data out there, it gets it in GBIF, and we don't have an agents table yet. That's still in development. But once that gets developed, all that should actually go into agents. So there is like some places where it's not being used in the most appropriate way, and it's mostly because we don't have the other tools to put it in. So, but we're getting there.
Yeah, at some point, the providers can be ahead of the infrastructure providers, where you're like, I have this data and I want to get it out there. So you just kind of stick it somewhere. That can happen too. One thing I wanted to mention real quick before we end, this pertains to Rick's question and James's question about what type of values do you put into that table. And I didn't mention too much about how the data in these two different formats actually are exported. Right now, they're exported into the other catalog numbers field of a Darwin Core archive or a Symbiota download, because that's what Darwin Core supports. But it seems kind of funny to be taking this whole table and squishing it into one single line, one single field. And luckily, people have thought about this before, and they have actually developed a Darwin Core extension. You can think of this as like another file in your Darwin Core archive. And what it would contain is another table of all these alternative identifiers. So in the future, we're hoping to have this additional table in exports that says, here are all the other identifiers that belong to these records. Makes it a little bit more annoying to search if you're just like a single spreadsheet type of person. But they'll probably also be exported still as other catalog numbers. It just kind of depends on the Darwin Core.
That's actually part of 3.2 because Neon, that was done with part of Neon. So it will actually be in that extension at the next 3.2 update.
James? Oh, you're muted still.
Sorry. You mentioned that during the Symbiota 3.0 upgrade, you migrated that data into the OMA-Cur identifiers table. Could you share the SQL that you used for that? Because I don't believe it's in the schema or the patch.
I feel like it should be in the patch. I'll try to follow up with you at that. Ed, do you have any
The
idea?
SQL for what?
For moving things from other catalog numbers to identifiers?
Well, the thing is, it has not been done. So it's not batched migrated. That's one of the issues. That's why we need. So the editor and the display parses it out on the fly, but it's not batched. It hasn't been batch migrated over because it's something that has to kind of been done with some oversight.
Oh shoot! Well, then I must have misspoken.
Yeah, well, that part, yeah, it's not done on the fly. It's just that the display in the editor can resolve it on the fly.
Oh, okay. So rewind what I told you before. We did not move everything into the new tables. I think we did that with some portals. Like I think with CCH2, we went through and did that for collections that asked us to do that. But never mind about doing that. I'll try to edit that out of the recording.
See, the thing is, if you have multiple identifiers separated by semicolons, it's hard to do that with an SQL statement. And especially, sometimes they're delimited by semicolons, sometimes by pipe, sometimes by commas. And doing all of that through an SQL query is challenging.
Yeah, and you might have noticed that. Yeah, you might have noticed that the parser sometimes mucks up when you have like opened up an occurrence editor record and you're like, why is everything in the value field instead of splitting it into tag name and value? So that's just kind of evidence of like sometimes it doesn't work super well. But we're trying. Well, great. Thanks everyone for joining us. That ended up being a rollicking discussion. Love it. And Lindsay, have we set the date for our next Symbiota support group?
Have
We have not. Okay. Well, I'm looking at the calendar and it looks like it's scheduled for January 6th, which I don't think is a holiday. So it should be January 6th in the new year. Thanks, everyone. Have a great December.